Hey, everybody. In this lecture, we're going to continue our discussion of Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia, although we will also talk about a trip he took to England, which is going to be very revealing. And then we're also going to talk about Franklin creating his own business, creating his own printing house. All right, so let's get into this. While Franklin was working for Keimer in Philadelphia, he got an interesting offer from the governor of Philadelphia, a man by the name of William Keith. Governor Keith read a letter that Franklin wrote to family members. He's a little vague on how this happened. The governor was on a boat with one of Franklin's other family members, and the family member gave this letter for Governor Keith to read. I think this is how it worked. When Franklin was in Philadelphia, he must have sent a letter initially back to his family, letting them know where he was and that he was okay. And then I suspect one or more family members sent letters back to Franklin asking him to come home. Something along the lines of, "We're worried about you, you're awfully young, why don't you come home?" Remember, the family was upset with Franklin about breaking his apprenticeship with James, but I also told you they didn't disown him, they didn't hate him, but there was a dispute between family members, and it seemed like most of the family was siding with James. But they didn't hate him, and they were still concerned with him. And so I suspect at least one member of the family encouraged him to come back to Boston. To that letter, I suspect Franklin sent another letter back home to Boston that said something along the lines of, "No, really, things are going great here. I have unique opportunities here." Remember, I told you in the previous lecture that there are two printers in Philadelphia, and they were both pretty bad printers. And so Franklin, it turned out to be fortuitous that Ben winds up in Philadelphia. This was a place with a lot more opportunity for him potentially than would have been there if he'd stayed back in Boston. So I think he tries to make it clear to the family, no, everything's okay. Please don't worry about me. Things are going to work out just fine. I suspect it was a letter that contained some of that information that Ben wrote, that the family member gave to Governor Keith to read on the boat. Now, Governor Keith, it turns out, was aware of the same thing that Ben was aware of, that both of the printers in Philadelphia were rather weak. And that was not good for the colony of Pennsylvania. That was not good for the most important city in the colony of Philadelphia. Philadelphia and Pennsylvania could really use a strong printer. And knowing this, Governor Keith decides to go pay this young man he was so impressed by in letter form and see him in person. And so Governor Keith goes to Keimer's printing shop and asks to see Benjamin Franklin. They meet, and Keimer tells Ben that he's impressed with him and that he would like Ben to start a printing business. And that if Ben could start a printing business, the governor would steer all of the all of the printing for the colony of Pennsylvania to Ben's new shop, essentially giving him a very big client and all but guaranteeing early success for his printing house. And so Governor Keith tells Ben, "Go back to Boston and speak with your father and see if your father will give you a loan to start the business." This sounds like a wonderful offer to Ben. Ben tells us he was a bit homesick and wanted to go home and smooth some things out with family members and see some friends anyways. So he was thinking about going to Boston anyway, so he might as well do this. Ben takes some time off from Keimer's shop and goes back to Boston. He speaks with his father, asks his father for a loan. And the father is pleased that Ben seems to be doing well, but ultimately says no to Ben's request for a loan. Ben's 19 years old at this point. And Ben says that his father said he was too young. And his father tells him, come back when you're 21 and we'll revisit this issue. And then maybe at that point, I will loan you money. I suspect there's also something else going on that Ben's not telling us. What age was Ben supposed to be when his apprenticeship ended, if he had legally followed through with the apprenticeship? That's right, the age of 21. I suspect Ben's father didn't want to loan him the money when Ben was 19 for fear of upsetting James. Because if James got word that his father had loaned Ben money, James, I think, rightfully might have been upset about it and confront his father. Hey, Dad, Ben's supposed to still be my apprentice. What are you doing loaning him money? You should have been telling him to return back to the printing house and fulfill his obligation to me. I think that's going on. And so I don't think it's coincidental that his father picked the age of 21 to return and talk about the subject again. At 21, if his father decided to loan him money and James complained, at least his father could have said, look, Ben's my son, I love him, but he's 21 now. His obligation would have been over for you, would have been over to you. So therefore, wanting the best for my son, I decided to loan him some money. I think that's what's really going on. Let's face it, this was kind of a time-sensitive offer that the governor was giving Ben, right? What if between the ages of 19 and 21, a highly qualified printer starts a business in Philadelphia, and suddenly at the age of 21, this offer is no longer viable because the governor's found somebody new? I think his father would have understood that. So I think it really has to do with James is the big reason. Not so much that Ben was too young, but that the father didn't want to get between these two sons that had a dispute. Either way, Ben is disappointed at his father's reaction, but not totally surprised. He tells us straight up. He's not surprised that this is what his dad had to say. So Ben gets back to Philadelphia and speaks with the governor and tells the governor, I'm sorry, Governor, I spoke with my father. My father will not lend me the money right now. Maybe in a couple years I'll be able to do it. In the meantime, I'll continue working for Keimer and I'll save money. And maybe one of these days I'll have enough money to start my printing business. To which Governor Keith says, well, wait a minute. Not so fast. What if I was able to secure you some loans that would enable you to start your business right away? Would you be interested in that? Of course, 19-year-old Ben. Yes, Governor, I would be very interested in that. The governor says, okay, well, that's what we'll do. I know some powerful people. I know some people with money. I will secure you loans. And then he says, wouldn't it be a good idea, Benjamin Franklin, if you go to England to supervise the building of this printing press? Nowhere in colonial North America would printing presses have been built in the early 1700s. This would have been custom order work that was done in England. This was not, printing equipment was pretty advanced engineering, and so it wasn't a sort of it wasn't an off-the-shelf kind of thing you would expect to get. Every printing press would have been custom-made to the buyer's specifications. Governor Keith, knowing this, asked Ben, wouldn't it be a good idea if you go to England and make sure your printing press gets built the way you need it to be built. And Ben, having never been to England, is intrigued by the idea and says, yes, that is a good idea. Okay, I will go to England. And he planned on using some of the money from these loans to pay for him to do that. But almost immediately after agreeing to all this, Ben tells us he starts to get some misgivings about this. I suspect he's feeling that sense that we've all had that something is too good to be true. Something's just off about this. But then he reassures himself, well, why would something be wrong? The governor's a powerful man. The governor can pull strings. Why would he be interested in messing with a 19-year-old young man? I'm sure everything's fine. But one of the things that starts to worry him is those letters of credit, those loan guarantees he was supposed to get aren't arriving when they're supposed to arrive. Now, boats weren't leaving every day between Philadelphia and London, at least not a passenger ship that Ben was going to be taking. And so he's got to wait a while before the ship that's going to take him to England arrives. And in the meantime, these letters of credit are supposed to arrive from the governor, and the governor keeps delaying when they're getting there. And this is just adding to this concern he has. But finally, right before he's about to leave and get on the ship, some letters arrive for him, and Franklin thinks, okay, good, I'm all right. Well, Ben gets on the ship, and after several weeks at sea, arrives in London, and takes his letters of credit to the place where he's supposed to redeem them for money. And he gives the papers to the man, and the man starts shaking his head. No, this is not good. And he tells Ben, the gentleman that wrote these letters of credit to you, I'm aware of this person, and this person is a scoundrel. And now here you sit in front of me with letters of credit from a scoundrel, and now I think you are a scoundrel too. So leave my office, don't come back, I'm not giving you any money. Which now has put Ben in this terrible situation. See, Ben didn't bring much money. Ben didn't have that much money. He expected when he got there, these letters of credit would pay for his expenses, that these would pay for his money to get back to Philadelphia. He doesn't even have enough money to get back. And because of this, he's going to have to get a job and save money to be able to eventually get back. But Ben's reaction to all this is really interesting. Now, a lot of us, if we had been in this similar situation, would have blamed Governor Keith for our misfortune and would have been quite upset at Governor Keith for what has happened to us. It turns out a lot of people in Philadelphia knew you had to be kind of careful with Governor Keith. He was one of these people, he was the kind of person that liked to make big promises, that he could do lots of things to help lots of people, but often failed to follow through. Benjamin Franklin, a young man, not being in Philadelphia for very long, wasn't aware of this. And so he took Governor Keith at his word. But a lot of us would be upset with Governor Keith. And Ben tells us straight up, you know what? I wasn't that mad at Governor Keith. And he tells us, you know who I blamed for what happened? I blamed myself. It was my fault. Nobody forced me to get on that boat. Nobody forced me to cross the Atlantic Ocean without enough money to get back to my home. Nobody forced me to be gullible. Nobody forced me to be naive. You know who's to blame for all this? Me. It's my fault. In fact, he tells us later on that when he got back to Philadelphia, Ben was gone for over a year. When Ben gets back to Philadelphia, Governor Keith had been removed from office and was now in a sort of lowly position. He was removed from office for kind of doing stuff like what he did to Benjamin Franklin. And Ben says one day he passed Governor Keith on the street, and Governor Keith couldn't even look him in the eye because of shame. And Ben said he actually felt kind of sorry for Governor Keith. Now, why does Ben think it's his fault? I mean, how many of us, you or I, in Benjamin Franklin's situation, a 19-year-old individual aspiring to do things, and some powerful person comes into our life and makes what seems like a credible offer to make your dreams come true? Who amongst us wouldn't have jumped on that offer? I know I would have jumped on that offer. And then if it fell through, yeah, I think, knowing myself, I think I would have blamed Governor Keith for what happened. But Ben wants us to get out of the habit of blaming other people when things go wrong in our life. Stop doing that, Ben would tell us. You have agency over your life. So therefore, take responsibility when things go wrong. Most of you watching this are quite young and you still have a lot of life ahead of you. But the older you get, the more people that you know, hopefully not many, but you'll know some of them, who are going to repeatedly make bad life decisions. And you're going to start to notice, I suspect some of you are already noticing, but you'll notice it more as you get older, that these people constantly blame other people. It's their boyfriend's fault for the relationship breaking up. It's his girlfriend's fault for all of these broken relationships. I keep dating the wrong girls, instead of looking in the mirror and thinking, well, maybe there's something wrong with him. People that can't hold down jobs or keep getting fired from jobs, and it's never their fault. It's always their boss's fault. It's funny how that works out. It's always the boss's fault. All right? Somebody that's on their fourth marriage, and it's always the ex's fault. Ben is trying to discourage us from becoming one of those people, and instead take responsibility for our lives. Like I said before, Ben tells us, hey, nobody made me get on that boat. It was my decision. I didn't have to trust Governor Keith. I didn't have to go to England without enough money or a backup plan to get me home. That was my fault. Okay. This is kind of the flip side of Franklin's introductory paragraphs. Remember when he kept taking credit for his good fortune in life? He's rich, he's famous, he's happy. And even while he was thanking God, he was making clear to the reader that I was involved with this. The conducing means I made use of, which with the blessing of God, so succeeded. This is sort of the flip side of that to Benjamin Franklin. All right? It's fine to take credit when you do things that become successful, but you also have to be willing to own it when you fail. Even when that failure involves other people, you still got to wear it. It's on you. There's something powerful about that when you come to understand that you are in control of your life. However, as we'll talk about as we go on in this class, there's some limitations to this attitude. Benjamin Franklin was a white male from a Protestant background, which placed him into the privileged realm of North American colonial society. But it turns out sometimes there are things that happen in your life that are, in fact, not your fault. We need look no further than our next autobiographer, Frederick Douglass, to understand that, no, it turns out sometimes when things go bad in your life, it's not your fault. There was nothing that Frederick Douglass did in his life that made him deserving of slavery. And there was no amount of hard work or discipline or grit or pull yourself up by the bootstraps that was going to eliminate slavery from North America. part of American character, as we'll talk about more and more in this class, is the idea of individualism and an individualistic spirit. And part of a faith in individualism is believing that your life is in your hands to control. And Franklin was very individualistic. We will see that. We'll talk about that as we continue. And so one of the things he's encouraging us in this with this story is to understand, like, you got to own it. You got to own your choices. We just need to qualify. In a lot of ways, there's good advice with this. But we also have to recognize that there are things that happen to people in life beyond their control. That this American individualism that requires you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, for some people, it's easier to do that than to others. Right? It's a lot easier if you come from a privileged background, have more opportunity, parents with wealth, better schools, better neighborhoods, safer environment, to achieve things than if you come from circumstances where all of those things are lacking. It doesn't mean it's impossible to pull yourself up when you are deprived of opportunities, but just let's not kid ourselves. Let's not pretend that it's the same for everybody to achieve these things. Right? Frederick Douglass simply would not have been allowed to achieve the same kinds of opportunities that Benjamin Franklin achieved because of the color of his skin. There's just no way around it. And so while Franklin's advice, which has been absorbed as part of American character of take responsibility, own your mistakes, is practical advice in a lot of ways for many kinds of people, when you try to apply those expectations to people in certain circumstances where they are actually facing circumstances beyond their ability to control, it is unfair. It would be unfair to imagine a scenario in 19th century America where Frederick Douglass could pull himself up by his bootstraps and achieve the same success that Benjamin Franklin did. The very notion is ridiculous. Yet somewhere embedded in American character is this expectation everybody can achieve it. Partly because there's this expectation that when we study American character, especially the old style that we talked about at the beginning of this class, we're always talking about white men. White men can achieve these things. But the opportunities for other people aren't always as available as they were with people like Benjamin Franklin. Well, Franklin was broke in England. He said he brought a little bit of money he intended to buy books with and have a little fun with. But he decides, he realizes he needs to get a job. And now, fortunately for Ben, he was a skilled printer, so he had a remarkable trade he could fall back on, and he winds up getting a job in a printing house. Okay? And in the beginning, things go well at the printing house. But not long after starting, Ben runs into some trouble with his coworkers. Ben's coworkers collected money to buy alcohol to share at work, which might sound surprising to you that people are working at the job, but this was not totally uncommon back during this time. It was believed that alcohol gives you strength. In fact, one of the reasons we refer to the percentage of alcohol content in a drink in terms of strength, Bacardi 151 is stronger than regular old, I don't know what the proof of normal Bacardi is, 80 proof, something like that, comes back from this old-fashioned idea that alcohol gives you strength. Of course, alcohol doesn't give you strength. Alcohol makes you stupid. when you drink too much of it. And so when you get drunk, you think you can lift things that you probably can't otherwise lift. So this is an old stereotype that, alcohol gives you strength, but people used to really believe it in the end. So if you had a job back in the old days that required an amount of physical exertion, sometimes people would drink a bit of alcohol throughout the day to keep their strength up. Now, you weren't supposed to be fall down drunk. Obviously, that would get you in trouble at work. But, if you had a sip or two while throughout your work day, you could do it to keep your strength up. Now, Ben tells us he wasn't much of a drinker. One, alcohol costs money, and Ben preferred not to waste money on things he didn't have to. He liked to save money. And since, water was free from the river, especially back where he lived, water was a little trickier in 18th century London because the population of London was so much bigger, almost 500,000 at this time. To give you an example, cities in Boston was probably at this time about 20 to 30,000 people. Philadelphia at this time probably was about 12,000 people. Those were big cities in colonial North America, but London had about 500,000 people at this time. So because there was such a large population, sanitation was a problem, sewage was a problem, human waste would find its way into riverways. So water was a little bit riskier in England. In fact, that was one of the reasons why people also drank alcohol in big cities like London, is because the alcohol helped keep the drink sterile. You didn't have to worry about that, at least not at this time in colonial North America. So water was free. You could drink all the water you had. Why would Benjamin Franklin, who was concerned about saving money, waste money on alcohol when he could drink water? And so when his new colleagues approached him to pitch in money for alcohol, Franklin politely refused. But they explained to him, no, you have to. You work here, we all pitch in for alcohol. You don't have to drink it, but you have to pitch in. Ben thought this was unfair. Why should he be forced to pay for something that he has no interest in partaking in? And so he dug his heels in and refused. I will not pay. His refusal to pay made Ben the guy at work that everybody else hated. He was that guy. And it got so bad that his fellow coworkers, some of them started sabotaging his work. And you could imagine, especially at a place like a printing press where there's delicate typesetting that was getting done, you could imagine how this would cause problems for Ben. Ben is setting a typeface, getting ready to print something. He goes off to, whatever, get something or do something else. He returns, his typeface is all messed up because one of his coworkers just ruined the work he had been doing for a while. It would be easy to mess with Ben in a printing house. And so Ben had to make a decision because what he feared was if things continued the way they were, he was going to get fired from his job because his boss, even if the boss was sympathetic to Ben's plight, can't fire everybody else at the printing house. He's going to fire the one person that everybody else seems to hate, and that's going to be Ben. And so Ben makes a decision. Well, he has two options. Let's put it this way. He could dig in his heels, stay firm in his commitment to not pay for something he rightly does not have to pay for, or it could be flexible and decide, I will pitch in money and therefore keep my job. And so I'll have to give up a little of my pay to spend money on something I don't really want to buy, but I will hold on to my job because if he clung to his principles and did not pay, he risked being fired from his job, which he seriously suspected was going to happen. So what does Ben decide to do? He decided to relent. He decided to give his coworkers money and pitch in for alcohol. All right. He tried to be reasonable. He tried to be flexible. And immediately after doing it, he says he was no longer the guy at work that everybody hated. He became one of the boys and everybody liked him. at the printing house. In fact, not only did he become a liked guy in the printing house, but he was actually able to convince some of his coworkers to give up drinking alcohol. Ben tells us that he'd always been strong. He's just sort of a naturally strong guy. And some of his coworkers marveled at his strength, particularly since they always associated strength with drinking alcohol. And so when Ben was just sitting around drinking water and they saw him lifting heavy things at work, some of them in their heads noted it and went, well, Benjamin Franklin, look at how strong he is. I wonder how he does it without the alcohol. But then once Ben pitched in money and patched things up with all his fellow coworkers, some of them could come up and ask him about it now. Hey, Ben, how'd you get so strong? Like, I got to drink alcohol to keep my strength up, but you don't drink alcohol. How did you do it? And Ben was able to convince them. He told them, no, alcohol doesn't give you any strength. It just makes you feel worse. It wastes your money. I'll tell you what, try and just drink water for a while. You'll feel better. Your head will be more clear. You'll save money. Try it. And Ben said he convinced some of his fellow coworkers to give up alcohol. Now, what's the lesson we're supposed to be learning from this story? Franklin is telling us about the virtues of being practical, of being flexible, about willing to compromise. One aspect of American character that people have noted is that the Americans, compared to other peoples in the world, have a penchant for being practical, focusing on what will work. Now, some of this people have attributed to the relative newness of American society. People in countries long more established had much longer standing traditions in which things became sort of frozen and calcified, certain traditions. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because this is the way we've always done this. This is what my dad did. This is what my grandparents did. So I'm doing it. The relative newness of America maybe allowed for the opportunity of trying to do some things in different ways. And as America has become more successful as a nation, one of the things people have attributed to the success was a kind of adaptability of the Americans, a practical nature, a willingness to do things differently. Benjamin Franklin is manifesting this kind of practicality. He's not being so rigid. He's not being so firm. Even when he pitched in money for alcohol, he tells us straight up, I wasn't happy about this. They weren't right. I was right. But I did it to get along with people. I did it for practical reasons because I didn't want to get fired from my job and then have no money and be stranded in England without prospects. You have to be flexible. All right? And so some people have looked at this story of Franklin's willingness to change and adapt as reflective of this sort of broader aspect of American national character, of a penchant for practicality. Now, again, when we talk about any of these elements of American character, whether it's practicality, whether it's penchant for hard work, whether it's individualism, none of these things are possessed 100% by Americans and 0 by other people in the world. Right? We're just talking about small degrees in either direction when we talk about this. Do the Americans tend to be more focused on individualism? Yes. Does that mean people in other countries don't possess individualism? Of course not. That's ridiculous. There are lots of other cultures that also emphasize individualism, and that people within even more communal countries, there are people within that society that manifest elements of individualism. It's never America 100% or the rest of the world 0. Or, in some cases, the Americans 0 and the rest of the world 100%. It's just varying degrees. So it's not to say the Americans are the only practical people, but it does seem that the Americans have prioritized a focus on practicality to a greater extent than some other people in the world. And people have latched on to this story with Ben. Now, Ben tells us about the virtues of this practicality, not only in the ability to help himself get along with people, but also to be able to change the opinions of other people. If you want to convince somebody else of your position or your way of thinking, sometimes you need to take the first step to compromise. And once you make that initial step, then maybe they take some steps towards you and learn how to, and be more willing to see your position, and then you will better be able to convince them of the correctness of your position. That's what happened with Ben and alcohol. He's like, okay, I'll take the first step. I'll pitch in for booze. I'm still not going to drink it, still not interested in it, still not in love with the idea. I have to pay for it, but fine. Here's my money. I'll pitch in. Once Ben showed some flexibility, then other people could take a step towards him. That's when they started asking, hey, Ben, how you get so strong? And he could explain to him, stop drinking alcohol. All right? So you need to be flexible. You need to be adaptable. This is one of the things people have focused on with American character. Well, turns out Ben was in England for longer than he should have been, because Ben brought one of his friends over with him to England. Two young men in a big, massive, anonymous city like London. Like I told you before, there was nothing like London in colonial North America. And Ben tells us he and his buddy had a pretty good time. His friend totally goes off the rails, having too much fun. But, just about at any time in history, at least over the last 500 years or so, if you're 19 years old in London, chances are you might be able to have a good time when you're there. And Ben did, kind of sowing his wild oats. In fact, back in Philadelphia before he left, he had started dating. He had started courting Deborah Reed, the woman we talked about before that he saw and she saw him when he walked into Philadelphia. They started dating. But Ben stayed in England a lot longer than he expected to. And if you read between the lines, Ben talks about going to the theater a lot. The theater was a good place to meet a prostitute. And at this time in history, prostitution was a lot more common, precisely because it was harder to get women to have premarital sex with you. Not impossible, but it was a bit of a harder sell at this time in history. So prostitution was more common for men to engage in premarital sex. If you're reading between the lines, it's pretty clear that Ben is forgetting about Deborah. He tells us straight up, I stopped writing to her. And he was spending some time with prostitutes there. But finally he starts to bear down when he realizes that, wait, I've been getting a little crazy. I've been letting my friend get me a little crazy. I got to bear down. And so he starts saving money, he stops wasting money, and gets enough money to go back to Philadelphia and make his dreams come true back there. So after about 18 months in England, Ben goes back to Philadelphia. All right. When he gets back, he gets his old job back with Keimer. However, Ben gets the feeling when he comes back that Keimer is using him to try and get the printing house to run smoothly. Keimer understands that while a literate individual, he's not very good with running the printing equipment. And so he's using Ben to get the shop running smoothly and to train other workers. And Ben's getting the feeling, as soon as he's trained other workers that can roughly do what Ben did, Ben's going to get fired. And so, seeing the writing on the wall after he comes back from England, one day Ben quits. Just, if he's going to fire me anyways, I might as well quit and not wait around for that to happen. But after Ben quits, one of his co-workers, a man by the name of Meredith, comes and approaches Ben with an offer. Okay, once again, another offer. Meredith has something of a wealthy father. And Meredith himself has been a disappointment to his father. Meredith had a drinking problem and wasn't a terribly hard worker. But Meredith's father knew about Benjamin Franklin and really liked Benjamin Franklin. You get the impression while you're reading this that young Meredith often heard his father say, "Why can't you be more like Benjamin Franklin?" That's the impression I get whenever I read about Meredith. And so what Meredith proposes, the young Meredith, is, why don't we start our own printing business together? My dad really likes you. My dad has some money. He'll front us some of the money to start a printing business. Why don't you take whatever money you save, Benjamin Franklin, I'll get some for my dad, and we'll start our printing house. Ben, recently unemployed Benjamin Franklin, says, that sounds great. All right, let's do it. However, they need printing equipment. It's not just going to happen tomorrow. Right? It was going to take a while. They're going to have to order stuff from England. This time Ben learned his lesson and he just ordered things from England and did not go back over there at this time. But Meredith tells Ben, why don't you go back to Keimer and ask for your old job back? Meredith just got a really complicated order he does not know how to do. He will definitely hire you back. And while you're working there again, you can start training me better. And now that I know that I'm going to own a printing business, I'll really start paying attention. I'm going to stop drinking. I'll start paying attention. I'll be a good worker. So finally, when our printing equipment arrives, I will really be able to help you run the business. And so Ben agrees to that. Now that he knows he's not going to be working for Keimer forever, okay, he'll just go. He'll make some money in the meantime. And then when the printing equipment arrives, they'll start their printing business. And that's what happens. They start their printing business. Ben and Meredith quit Keimer's shop and start running their business. And in the beginning, things were going well. Ben was a very talented printer. He knew he would be. They got clients coming there because the quality of their work was so good. However, Meredith started to relapse and fall back into bad habits. He started drinking again and didn't seem to like being a printer any more now that he was a business owner than when he didn't own the business. Turns out Meredith just didn't like printing at all. And Meredith was getting drunk and not focusing on work. And this was a problem for Ben. It was a problem not so much that Ben actually needed Meredith's labor. He really didn't. Ben could run the place and hire the people he needed. He didn't really need Meredith, other than Meredith's father's money, which had already been placed into the business. But Meredith was developing a bad reputation as being a drunk and not focusing on work. And this is a time, the 18th century was still a time where reputation was very important. And Franklin was worried that Meredith's increasing bad reputation was going to reflect on him. And clients were going to stop coming. No matter how disciplined or hardworking Ben was, people were going to stop coming because they heard Meredith was a drunk who was lazy. And so Ben needed to get out of this partnership. And this is one of those examples of Benjamin Franklin's mastery of human psychology. Ben understood if he just went and confronted Meredith and just told him straight up, hey man, you're a drunk and you're lazy and you're wrecking the business, sell your end of the business to me, that wasn't going to work. Meredith would be offended, he would feel disrespected, and he might be willing to dig his heels in and submarine, destroy the business just to spite Benjamin Franklin. And so Ben knew that wasn't going to work, so he had to do something else. So what Ben utilized was what we would call today reverse psychology. Ben goes to Meredith, and I'm paraphrasing with all this. Meredith, you seem to be unhappy with our partnership, and that makes me feel bad. I don't want us to have a falling out. So I'll tell you what, why don't I, Benjamin Franklin, sell you my half of this printing business? Then you, Meredith, could run this business all by yourself, and I'll do something else, and then there won't be any bad bloods, and we'll still be friends. How does that sound to you? Now, Meredith had been treated with respect and was offered respect. And because of that, now Meredith can make a counterproposal, which was the one that Ben always imagined was going to happen anyways. Meredith tells Ben, you know what, why don't we do the opposite? You know what, Ben, you're really good at this printing. You seem to have a passion for it. You like it. I thought I might like it better when I was a business owner, but it turns out I don't. I really don't like the printing game. So therefore, why don't I, Meredith, sell you my half of the business, and you, Benjamin Franklin, can run this all by yourself. How does that sound? That's what Ben wanted the whole time. He knew Meredith was not going to accept his offer to buy the business because Meredith couldn't do it, and everybody knew Meredith couldn't do it. But by approaching it in this way, Ben was granting, undeserved as it was, a degree of respect to Meredith, which disarmed Meredith and allowed Meredith to do what Franklin always wanted him to do, which was sell out his half of the business to Ben. And that's what Meredith does. And so at the age of 21, Franklin stops part one with him owning his business outright. And that's where he initially sort of thought that the story was going to end. He told us everything we needed to know. This was the beginning of what is going to be his great success. But he doesn't really start telling us about that success. He just ends it at the age of 21. Okay. When we come back for the next lecture, I'll talk about what's interesting and revealing about where Ben ends this story, because I think is super interesting. All right, that's enough for this time, you guys. Take care.